What if everything you believe about yourself is just a well-told lie? Not out of malice, but out of fear. The human mind is an expert at building refuges. It distorts, erases, rearranges memories, all to avoid confronting what truly is. We live surrounded by edited truths, acceptable versions of what we feel. But what happens when the disguise begins to weigh you down? When the character you created, it becomes the prison of your own soul? Because sometimes it's easier to believe in the lie that corrupts than in the truth that sets you free. Sigmund Freud, Arthur Schopenhauer, Friedrich Nietzsche, three thinkers who, in different ways, exposed the same dilemma. The human being cannot bear the truth for too long. Freud showed that the unconscious erases what the eye cannot face. Schopenhauer revealed that the will distorts the world to protect desire. And Nietzsche reminded us that even error can hold value when it's the only way to stay alive. But what begins as protection soon becomes escape. The mind lies to keep itself whole, and the price is high. Every lie saves a little and kills a little too. Self-deception is sweet until it starts to taste bitter. We live in a time where truth has been replaced by versions of lies. Love became appearance. Success became performance. Pain became content. And the more we pretend to be in control, the more we lose ourselves. The collective lie has become the new normal, and reality, a threat. But the body knows. The gaze exposes. The silence reveals. Because the soul, even in silence, always knows when it's being betrayed. And it's at that point that the pleasure of self-deception begins to rot from within. This video is a mirror, not to teach you, but to remind you that every lie has an expiration date, and when it ends, life demands a reckoning. Freud would call it a symptom. Schopenhauer, frustrated will. Nietzsche, rebirth through pain. But you don't need to name it. Just feel it, because self-deception isn't an error to be corrected. It's a cycle to be broken. And maybe, in recognizing that, you'll realize that truth was never the enemy. It was the calling. Freud said that the unconscious hides what the eye cannot bear to face. It's as if the mind puts on a blindfold, not out of malice, but out of survival instinct. Every forgetfulness, every slip, every well-crafted excuse is a disguise for pain. When truth threatens balance, the unconscious turns off the light, so we won't see the damage. And we call that strength, when, in truth, it's fear disguised as control. The lie is born in that soil, the fear of feeling too much. It's when someone trades truth for comfort. It's not jealousy, it's care. I didn't fail, it just wasn't meant to be. The mind creates these phrases to soften the impact of reality. And for a while, it works, because human beings don't run from truth. They run from what truth causes. And in that space between what's real and what's bearable, self-deception is born. But living through justifications comes at a cost. The body feels the weight of every lie the soul must carry. Sleep becomes shallow. The chest tightens. Laughter loses its color. The mind can deceive itself, but the body never lies. Freud said that what is repressed always returns, and returns disguised as anxiety, distraction, silence. Little by little, a person begins to realize that what once felt like protection has become a prison. That what once helped you survive now keeps you from living. And that's the turning point, when the comfort of illusion is no longer enough to keep emptiness away. Because there comes a time when the fear of seeing becomes smaller than the fear of continuing to pretend. And it's exactly there, in that instant, when the mirror begins to show what was always there, that the first glimpse of truth is born. A reflection still trembling, but real. And the question that arises, almost whispered, is simple yet dangerous. If I stop running, what's left of me? Schopenhauer claimed that the world is not as it is, but as our will wants it to be. And it's in that wanting that we lose ourselves. The will creates a filter. It shows only what suits us and erases what threatens what we feel. That's why, even when something is clearly over, we still insist on believing. Love, dreams, projects, everything may be falling apart, yet the will keeps repeating. It's still possible. This will is blind, yet convincing. It doesn't lie to hurt. It lies to keep alive a part of us that still can't accept the end. It's the "there's still love" when what's left is just attachment. It's the "it'll change" when deep down we know it won't. The mind creates a new story, an edited version of reality, because it's easier to fix the story than to admit the collapse. Schopenhauer called this the suffering of the will, the clash between what we desire and what truly is. And that clash hurts. The person begins to live between two worlds, that of reality and that of hope. One says, "Accept." The other whispers, "Try once more." And they try, not because they truly believe, but because they fear the void that follows surrender. The will makes us confuse stubbornness with faith, persistence with love, pain with purpose. It's the human way of not letting die what once gave meaning. But will has its limit. It doesn't change reality. It only delays it. And when reality returns, because it always does, the fall is heavier. What once felt like hope turns into exhaustion. The person starts to realize they're no longer fighting for what they want, but for what they've already lost. And that is the beginning of awakening. Schopenhauer declared that all suffering is born from the frustration of the will. But perhaps true suffering begins when we realize that we were the ones feeding it. Because sometimes what hurts isn't losing. It's realizing how long we insisted on something that no longer existed. And in that moment, a new question arises. Could it be that the lie, even a small one, is what still keeps us standing? Nietzsche mentioned that even error has its merit. And perhaps he said that because he knew human beings need to believe in something, even if that something isn't true yet. When the mind is shattered, it invents meaning to keep from collapsing, creates stories, personal myths, promises of a new beginning. That's how many people survive the unbearable, by deceiving themselves just enough to keep breathing. After a loss, for instance, almost everyone makes a pact with their own hope. It was for the best. It was meant to be this way. These phrases are small lies, with a huge purpose, to keep the soul standing, while the heart heals. Nietzsche called this transfiguring pain, turning suffering into story, failure into learning. It's not falseness. It's a way of rearranging chaos until it makes sense again. Illusion, in this context, is a bridge. Without it, despair would become an abyss. The "it'll be okay," even when reason doubts it, is often what keeps someone from giving up. Because humans don't seek raw truth. They seek the meaning that makes it bearable. And it's in that space, between the real and the possible, that the lie fulfills its noblest purpose, allowing hope to mature, before consciousness can face it without fear. But every lie has an expiration date. What once kept us standing can later keep us from moving. The beautiful story we invented no longer fits our actions. That's when we realize that hope has turned into anesthesia, not drive. That the self-deception that once saved us now suffocates us. Nietzsche said, "One must still have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star." And perhaps that's the point. A lie can help us cross the chaos, but it's in letting go of it that the star appears. When hope stops being a lie and becomes courage. When comfort gives way to clarity and truth finally becomes bearable again. Freud believed that the unconscious doesn't throw anything away. It only hides what we're not yet ready to face. And perhaps that's why so many truths return. As dreams, as slips, or distractions. The mind creates pauses, not erasures. Forgetfulness is sometimes just the time the soul asks for to recover. In that border between what we know and what we avoid knowing, there lies a gray zone, the territory where deception and truth blend. Self-deception isn't a complete lie. It's a silent agreement between pain and fear. The person feels, but pretends not to. They know, but convince themselves they don't. It's a delicate way of negotiating with one's own limits. Freud saw this as the theater of the unconscious. Every lapse, every slip, a performance meant to protect the I from what still threatens it. The problem is, the play doesn't last forever. Over time, the mind begins to trip over its own curtains. What was once defense becomes repetition. The forgotten name returns in a dream. The repressed memory reappears, disguised in a gesture. It's the unconscious asking for attention, saying, "I'm ready to come out." But we insist on calling it coincidence. Pretending to be in control feels safer than admitting vulnerability. Truth, when it tries to surface, doesn't arrive screaming. It appears slowly, in ordinary details. A look, a scent, a phrase spoken without thought. And in that moment, the lie reveals its true purpose. It never wanted to destroy us, only to buy us time. But when time stretches too long, what was protection becomes a prison. And it is at this point that the most human conflict of all arises. To remain attached to the lie that protects, or to have the courage to see what heals. The pause that the lie offers is sweet, but brief. The healing that truth brings is bitter, but freeing. And when the soul begins to suspect this, the next step inevitably leads toward repetition. The cycle of deceptions the mind keeps reliving until it finally learns to let go. Schopenhauer believed that human will is a cycle, a movement that insists on desiring the same mistake, only under different names. And that's how life repeats itself. Faces change, promises change, stories change, but the plot, deep down, remains the same. The mind creates a new illusion and calls it a beginning. Without realizing it's simply returning to the starting point. Repetition is the most elegant way the unconscious has found to teach what hasn't yet been learned. Every mistake is an echo of something unresolved. A person says, "This time it's different," yet soon finds themselves feeling the same pain, reacting the same way, wearing the same masks. It's what Nietzsche would call the psychological eternal return, the loop of the ego that hasn't yet learned to hold the truth without running from it. Freud saw this process as repetition, compulsion, the urge to relive trauma until consciousness finally understands it. That's why we go back, not because we want to suffer, but because we still need to understand what suffering came to teach. The lie, in this context, is just the set reappearing, the play being performed once more, in the hope of a different ending. But the ending only changes when the character changes, when he stops searching for new plots and starts looking at the script he keeps repeating. Schopenhauer said that man desires until he learns to desire less. And perhaps that's true maturity, realizing that peace isn't in controlling what happens, but in accepting what repeats, as a message, not a punishment. And when a person finally understands this, that the lie doesn't need to be fought, but understood, the cycle begins to lose power. Deception stops being a refuge and becomes a mirror. And in that mirror, a new question arises, perhaps the most important of all. If I keep repeating the mistake, is it because I haven't learned, or because I still haven't forgiven myself? Freud said that the masses believe because they need to believe. Alone, a human lies to endure pain. In groups, they turn the lie into a system. It's easier to be deceived together than to face reality in silence. Shared illusion unites, gives purpose, and masks the void. And that's how self-deception stops being individual and becomes culture. We live surrounded by stories that promise meaning, success, constant happiness, the perfect body, the ideal life on screens. Each of these images is a mirror that reflects what we want to see, not who we are. And collectively, we accept the reflection because it's more comfortable than confrontation. Schopenhauer would say, we live in a dream shared by the will, a collective hypnosis where everyone pretends to be awake. Social media is perhaps the clearest example of this. There, each person builds a version of themselves and believes in it. The forced smile, the motivational quote, the edited happiness. It's all performance, and the more we repeat it, the more we believe it. It's a lie so well rehearsed that it doesn't even hurt anymore. Nietzsche said that we need illusions to live, but also the courage to see them for what they are. The problem is that collective comfort comes at a cost. Comparison turns into anxiety. Appearance turns into identity. And truth becomes an irritating noise. At the back of the mind, society moves endlessly, trying to look fine, yet fewer people actually know what it means to be fine. Illusion unites, but lucidity frees. And when someone awakens in the middle of the crowd, it's not arrogance, it's courage. Perhaps that's the beginning of true freedom, realizing that the world we've invented is not the one we live in, that it's possible to belong without having to pretend, that the collective lie is not destiny, it's a choice. And when one begins to see, others begin too, because truth, once awakened in one, ignites in all, even if silently. There comes a time when the disguise begins to weigh you down. What once protected now suffocates. Freud explained that a symptom only disappears when truth finds space to emerge. And that's what happens when the lie loses its protective function. The unconscious stops hiding, the body starts speaking, and the self realizes it can no longer keep pretending. It's the moment when the pain of maintaining illusion becomes greater than the fear of facing reality. Awakening doesn't come with light, it comes with silence. It's when something inside us grows tired of holding up the character. Laughter no longer fits, explanations sound hollow, and the mirror seems to look back at us. That's when self-deception begins to crumble, not because we want it to, but because there's no energy left to sustain it. And that surrender, which once looked like weakness, is in truth the first act of strength. Nietzsche believed that the true man is the one who has the courage to endure the truth. And to endure is not to accept with head held high. It's to tremble, to cry, to dismantle certainties until only the essential remains. That's what awakening is. The moment we stop protecting ourselves from life and finally start living it, where pain turns into clarity and fear turns into presence. In that moment, everything that was hidden begins to reorganize itself. The lie dissolves, the will quiets down, and the gaze changes direction. The person stops seeking comfort and starts seeking meaning. And for the first time, they feel peace, not because the world improved, but because they stopped fighting what is. And perhaps this is the liberation we've been seeking without knowing it. Not to live without illusions, but to face them without having to dwell in them. Because when the lie no longer serves, truth stops being a threat and becomes home. And it's there, in the reunion with the real, that consciousness awakens, not to a new world, but to see the same world with new eyes. The lie comforts, but it does not set you free. It's the blanket that warms you, but suffocates you while you sleep. And when sleep ends, the cold of truth enters, not to punish, but to awaken. Maturity begins, when the pain of pretending becomes greater than the pain of facing. It's there that the character dies, and the human being is born. Because there is no freedom without disillusionment, and there is no peace without ruin. Nietzsche saw in disillusionment a step forward, the beginning of lucidity. Freud saw in truth a return to the real, the end of defenses, the beginning of healing. Schopenhauer saw in acceptance the first act of wisdom, a surrender that does not defeat, but brings peace. Perhaps they were all speaking of the same thing, under different names. The courage to see without embellishment, to feel without anesthesia, to live without illusions. Peace, after all, is not the absence of pain. It's the moment when pain finally makes sense, and what once was deception becomes understanding. But once you learn to see your own lies, a new challenge arises: to recognize the lies of the world, the ones that don't come from within, but are placed upon you. Because power rarely shouts, it whispers. It hides in words, in ideas, in the discourses that shape what you call truth. And the most dangerous kind of deception is the one you never realized you believed. In the next video, we'll open our eyes to that. And if you want to continue this journey, you'll find complementary materials in the pinned comments, reflections and readings that deepen these themes for those who wish to understand themselves more profoundly. Subscribe, turn on notifications, like, share, and comment. What was the hardest lie you ever had to tell yourself? Truth doesn't arrive to change what you see. It arrives to destroy the gaze that made the lie possible.